So hi folks, my name is Sophia Sanniti. I hope you can all hear me well. I am the GSA Labor Coordinator. I am also a fifth year PhD candidate at the university in the environment faculty. I'm here today hosting the Know Your Rights panel discussion. This is hosted in partnership with the Canadian Union of Public Employees and the ongoing union drive, Organize UW, who's campaigning to unionize the University of Waterloo graduate student workers. So starting off with a land acknowledgement, we acknowledge that we live and work on the traditional territory of the Arawandran, the Anishinaabe, and the Haudenosaunee peoples. The University of Waterloo is also situated on the Haldimand Tract, land promised to the Six Nations that includes 10 kilometers on either side of the Grand River. We make this statement to act against the erasure of ongoing colonial legacies across Turtle Island and to acknowledge that we contribute to and benefit from the expulsion, assimilation, and genocide of Indigenous peoples. And we make these statements to express gratitude and to honor the Indigenous peoples who have lived and worked on this land, both historically and presently. So as a quick introduction, I will be moderating this panel and I'll be providing just a short overview of what we hope to accomplish today. So this topic is on worker rights. If you are a teaching assistant, a research assistant, or a sessional instructor, you are a worker at the University of Waterloo. You have taxable income that you pay, that you get paid. And the purpose here is to really just empower workers with more knowledge of what your labor rights are and the policies around those labor rights that protect you. As well, creating awareness of pathways for advocacy so that you can advocate for yourself through these labor rights and policies, and to advance the professional development and transferable skills both within academia and beyond if you choose to go into other industries or sectors. I invite you all to visit the GSA website under our community banner, Graduate Student Workers, where there are a ton of resources right now for you to learn more about these issues. And in particular, we have an ongoing module that's being uploaded over the next couple of weeks around conflict management. So negotiating your hours and ensuring a respectful division of labor between you and your course instructor. So we have an extremely loaded, exciting panel for you today. The way that this panel will work is each speaker is going to get 10 minutes for their part of the panel. The first speaker we have is Lara, a PhD candidate in English here at the University of Waterloo. She will take 10 minutes to discuss her sort of on-the-ground perspective of being a graduate student worker and some of the experiences that she's had to deal with over the years. Next, I will introduce Ashley, the GSA-UW Student Wellness Coordinator, who will speak to the existing pathways at the University of Waterloo for students to advocate for themselves on campus. Next, we have Addy, the Senior Research Officer of Human Rights and Labor at the Canadian Union of Public Employees, who will speak from a human rights perspective on the ways in which you can advocate for yourself with existing infrastructure around human rights. Finally, we have Dave Steele, a legal representative at CUPE, who will speak to the sort of legality of employment as well as opportunities that unionization presents for us. So without further ado, I will pass it off to Lara to kick off this panel. Welcome, Lara.
Thank you so much, Sophia. My name is Lara McCauley, and I'm a third-year PhD candidate in the English department. I'm also, as Sophia mentioned, an international student here at Waterloo. I'm going to talk today mainly about my own experience as an international student and some of the issues that other international students have called out at the university. I want to start by sharing my experience onboarding or joining UW as a grad student and worker, because these are issues that the experience that I had was similar with other students. I think that's important to discuss. So I received my offer letter to join UWaterloo around April, May 2019, and I was very excited. And obviously I started to plan out the costs and living expenses associated with this big move from, in my case, Lebanon to Canada. I relied heavily on information provided online by the university and cost breakdowns, as well as the information provided about international student experiences compiled by the Student Success Office. and on my graduate coordinator for department and program specifics. And the first thing was that I quickly learned as soon as I moved or was actually paying for things that the expenses provided online are different or not up to date as they should be, which is quite a big issue when you're trying to budget a big move from one country to another. And you're also relying on the funding that you will be receiving. So you need that information to be as clear and transparent and as accurate as possible, which unfortunately wasn't exactly the case in my situation. So going back to all the sources that I did receive, I do want to acknowledge that they were extremely helpful to some extent. But yeah, as I have already mentioned, I learned that the conditions for international students varied significantly, and that the onus was mainly on me to know and also to inform people of the different conditions when it came to funding, awards, and application deadlines. With that being, what I mean by this is that my department was very well informed, and everyone I talked to, about conditions in relation to domestic students, but not as much when it came to international students. So there was always a need to remind and also to refresh about the conditions that were specific to me. And that might not seem like a big issue, but let's say you're in a situation where you are not aware of a deadline or a change in funding that's going to happen. You might find yourself in a precarious situation where suddenly you're not getting the funding that you are promised because there has been a change in your funding program, and suddenly you're stuck, unable to pay your rent in a foreign country, and really not getting the assistance that you deserve right away. What's another thing I want to talk about? Okay, so an important issue which resonated with me and with other prospective and incoming international students, in addition to kind of changes in fundings or lack of complete clarity coming in, is the scholarship and award opportunities, which coming in, I was informed and also kind of relieved to hear that in addition to kind of the funding package that I would be offered, that there would be additional funding opportunities through awards and scholarships. However, coming to Waterloo and applying for these awards, I quickly learned that they're limited for international students and not as widely available as they are for domestic students. And those that are available, such as OGS, the competitive pool is wider than it is for domestic students. For example, international students applying for OGS do not compete within their department, but compete university-wide, and there are less spots. So it becomes significantly harder to be able to receive these awards. And again, leaving international students with less opportunities to apply for additional funding. This not only increases stress in relation to funding, but also disadvantages international students in comparison to their domestic counterparts when it comes to the requirements of the degree. I think it's very imperative that each department has someone well-versed and knowledgeable about the requirements of the international students in their department, even if there's only one or two students. Often students are put again in a situation where they have to do a lot of the work and they might not always know what is necessary, what are all the conditions. So I wanted to mention these issues again about coming into Waterloo, because in the past few months, I have talked to two prospective graduate students who wanted to learn more about what it means to come to both Canada, to Waterloo, and to the university. So I tried my best to help them unpack their offer letters and properly understand what resources and aids were at their disposal as international students, and also the conditions that they had to be mindful of. It was disappointing, but unfortunately expected that they were in the same boat that I was in, where they received information that in a sense was more relatable to domestic students, but not to international students. So I had to be sort of the bearer of bad news to say that, yes, there are funding opportunities, but they're conditioned in these ways. Yes, you can work, but you have to be mindful of other specific details. With that in mind, there have been many moments where I felt unsupported and even helpless as a temporary resident in Canada. I was also wary and cautious about rocking the boat because I don't want to jeopardize my visa status, an issue that's very important for all temporary residents in Canada, and specifically like international students in our case. And many international students worry about having a voice or being very vocal on campus and at the university. Because they're mindful of their temporary status or their long-term plan of applying for permanent residency. It's sort of a precarious situation where international students avoid speaking up as much as they can, just to not, again, jeopardize their situation fully. Other issues that have come up for me and also other students is issues related to changes in funding packages, as I briefly mentioned, and allocation of funding that were not previously clearly stated or forwarded. Our offer letters do state, and I've heard this from different departments, kind of the total funding that we're getting, but not a clear breakdown about where the funding will come every term. Instead, we're told that it comes from a pool and is allocated differently each term, which does create some stress and an unsettling feeling about, well, where my funding is coming from, how am I going to expense and budget my life in the next few months or term. Other issues include tuition increases, and support during the pandemic was exceptionally frustrating. International student tuition had risen when I believe domestic student tuition hadn't at a specific term. You can correct me on that. I'm basing this off of memory, which was extremely unfair, given the fact that, you know, a lot of international students were stuck in Canada, did not have the opportunity to go back home, were in situations where they lost any part-time job that they might have had. So that's something that really kind of is, again, frustrating for international students. Other issues include issues with mental health support that international students face in relation to either their home country or having, you know, done this massive move to a new country and might experience. And, you know, additional issues include program and permit extensions, support with supervisor and teaching disputes, and other general issues. Students also worry about what work they can do and how many hours they are allowed to work, be it on campus or off campus. And there have been instances where there's been a lack of clarity on some of these fronts in terms of where and how much students can work given the hours that they are allowed to work based on their study permit. So again, these are some of the issues that come to mind that I have faced as an international student that have made me feel helpless and very frustrated living in Canada, living through a pandemic, which is why I joined the union efforts at UW in the summer of 2020, because I very quickly learned that a lot of the issues that I faced, as did my fellow colleagues, could be resolved or at least negotiated better through unionization. I won't speak much to, I guess, the benefits of unionization, because I will leave that to the KP representatives here, who will definitely have more knowledgeable things to say about that. I would want to direct, in addition to what we're going to learn in this session, those interested in kind of migrant student rights and international student rights specifically, to the work, the advocacy work of Migrant Students United, and I can share their website. I do recommend you check out their website to learn about your rights in Canada in terms of immigration and rights at work and to work. They actively advocate for equal rights and permanent immigration status for all, as well as other specific legislative issues, and they assist with student and work permit extensions, among other issues. And that's all I have to say for the moment, so thank you.
All right, thank you, Lara. I just had to exit my building for emergency purposes, but we're all good now. So thank you so much for that. I just wanted to comment again on sort of the issues around unstandardized working environments and how easy it is for these employers to then take advantage of the situation as a result, because it's that much more difficult for students to hold those institutions accountable and for there to be efficient accountability mechanisms as a result. So that's just something that I thought I would share in response to Lara's presentation. Thanks again for sharing. Ashley, are you ready? We're good. All right, Ashley's going to go next, and she is going to provide a, she's going to provide an overview of what mechanisms currently exist brought by the GSA. Welcome, Ashley.
Hi, thanks, Sophie. Hi, everyone. Yes, I am also with Sophie, and we have a fire drill right now, so that's why I'm outside on this lovely day, at least. So hello, everyone. I'm just going to wait for my slides to pop up, and then we can get started. All right. So yes, as Sophie mentioned, I am here to tell you all about some of the pathways you can take as a student at UW, specifically through the policies that we have here and some of the services that we offer at the GSA specifically. So my name is Ashley, like I just mentioned, and I am the current student wellness coordinator at the Graduate Student Association. I am also a fourth-year PhD candidate in sociology, studying crime and peer influence. All right. All right, so just a quick overview of what the GSA can do to help you if you're ever in a bit of an issue, you run into an issue, whether it be with your TA placement, your RA placement, or just anything else student related at UW. One of the main services that we offer are confidential advising sessions. So basically, this could be for a variety of issues, like I just mentioned. If you're facing conflict, if you're being harassed, you feel like you've been discriminated against, you're having some issues with your funding, you want some help filing a petition, there's issues with your payment, basically anything that's student related at UW, you can come to us and we can have a meeting with you, talk through the issue, figure out what some options might be, what policies the issue relates to, what resources might be related to the issue on and or off campus that you could use, basically to help you navigate the situation. And you can reach out to us at any point, and there is no cap on how many times you can come meet with us. So if you want to use that service, you can make an appointment by contacting the GSA office directly, or feel free to contact me directly at gsa-wellness@uwarlu.ca, and we can get the process started for you. Some other things that we can help it for is we can actually at the GSA advocate directly on your behalf with your permission, like through discussions with the Office of Graduate Studies and Postdoctoral Affairs. And of course, this all depends on the context of the issue. And of course, as always, like I just mentioned, your consent. But yeah, if you would like something like that, feel free to reach out. Some other things that we have are ongoing discussions with university and government bodies to increase and improve the supports available to students. And of course, like Sophie mentioned, and I'm sure which will be brought up again throughout this presentation series today, is that we do have a role in Organized UW, where we're starting to hopefully hold up and start a union here for our student workers. All right, so here are some examples of issues that I have seen pop up on campus. And yes, some of these might be surprising, but they do happen. So if they happen to you, feel free to reach out to us and we can help you navigate that problem. So some of the things that I've seen are supervisor and employer conflict. And unfortunately, I see this pop up a lot in my confidential advising sessions. This could be anything from, you're facing a supervisor that yells and screams at you, or says that you're not doing your work properly, or, refuses to give you your funding, and there's conflict in there. So things related to that. Or things related to, your supervisor's fine, but maybe the department or school isn't releasing your funds to you that you deserve or you've worked for. Other issues is, if you're in a TA or an RA position or a sessional position and you've done some work, but maybe you've had to leave at a certain point in the term to go on leave, or perhaps you've switched RA ships and maybe you have a supervisor that is coming to you saying like, hey, I need a refund for the work that you did in the past because you didn't complete the project. That's not okay. You earned that money. Come reach out to us and we could help you with that as well. We also have seen issues with supervisors and employers creating illegal consequences for students, like fining students for showing up late to a meeting. That's not okay. All right, next slide, please. All right, so some of the policies that relate to your situation or could relate to your situation here at UW is policy 33, which is on ethical behavior. And basically, briefly, this policy basically outlines that the university community must be just and respectful. It applies to all members of the university community, including staff, faculty, students, everyone. It also pertains to activities that take place on and off campus. Basically, if it's related to UW at all, it could fall under this policy. And basically, it's there to prevent or create a pathway for students that may be, you know, having that supervisor conflict, like I just mentioned, or any sort of issue with a supervisor, just being acting in an unethical or disrespectful way towards you. All right, so who can you talk to start a policy 33 complaint? It doesn't necessarily have to go right to the top right away. Again, who you talk to and what policy you take and what happens, it's totally dependent on the situation, your context, your comfort level, what you want to see out of the results of launching the complaint. Again, it's totally dependent on the context. It just depends. But some of the people that you can talk to, of course, are us at the Graduate Student Association. You could talk to your supervisor or course instructor if, of course, they're not the main course of the problem, your department of graduate coordinator, your chair, your dean, the GSPA, police services, if you'd like them to get involved, depending on the situation, accessibility services, counseling services, whatever you feel would help you in your situation. All right, so some other university offices that support you. Again, these are not all of the offices, and if you would like to learn more about these offices or other resources, feel free to reach out. But again, some other ones that might be helpful for you are things like the Writing Communication Center, Accessibility Services if you need some sort of accommodation, the Center for Teaching Excellence, the Office of Conflict Management and Human Rights. Again, there's lots of resources on campus, and if you're not sure where to go or where to start, feel free to reach out to the GSA and we can help you navigate that. All right, so quickly, what are your rights as a TA? So just a brief overview, you do have rights. You're an employee, whether or not some supervisors at UW or staff members at UW recognize that is in question, but you are an employee, you do have rights, right? So these are all the policies listed on the slide that you might want to just kind of check out, familiarize with some of the policies, see what kind of specific policies are at UW and relate to your rights, like conflict of interest or accessibility or ethical behavior, like I just mentioned, health, safety, and environment. My main suggestion is just to give a read through and just get familiar with those kind of policies at UW. The one that's probably going to come up is policy 30, because that is one that specifically relates to your employment as a graduate student TA. And basically, all TA policies at UW, of course, must adhere to provincial and federal laws, like the ones you might hear about today. It also outlines that graduate student employees are paid in an hourly rate, which is set annually. So, you know, a student over in arts is not going to be getting paid $15 an hour, and a student engineering getting paid $60 an hour for a TA placement. It's fairly a bit more standardized that way. But if you're getting $15 an hour as a TA, you know, that's something that is not okay and something you may want to check into. It also sets the maximum hours that you can work and what kind of work falls under a TA-ship. So if you have a supervisor that's asking you to babysit, that's not okay. That's not in your role as a TA. That's not relevant to what you're doing. So yeah, just check out that policy. All right, some last thing, some general tips that I would like to let you know of things that I have seen over the years in my role that are super important. One, keep a timeline of events and documents surrounding an issue or something that might become an issue. So things like emails with the supervisor or your funding letters, keep all of that documented in case you ever have to use it. Two, reach out for advice as soon as an issue arises. Of course, us at the GSA, we can help you at any point, but when you contact us sooner rather than later, there's probably more that we can do to help you. Three, familiarize yourself with campus resources and policies. Four, communicate as clearly as possible with others. So, you know, be upfront with your boundaries in your role, or, you know, talk about your expectations. So if those things are clear to your employer and vice versa right from the start. And I think that pretty much sums up my presentation. But as always, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. Again, my email is gsa-wellness@uwaterloo.ca.
All right, thank you so much, Ashley. We've got geese, we've got fire alarms, we've got Waterloo chaos going on over here. It's very exciting. I just want to reiterate what Ashley had said there definitely check out the GSA workers, graduate student workers page, where we have the TA hours allocation form. That is a really vital document that you can use to bring in on day one of your TA, of your RA, and say, you know, what are the expectations of the semester? What are the hourly expectations? And really push to meet and ensure that all of their expectations are being met, so that you don't get sort of thrown exams at the end of your semester by surprise. So ensuring that you're on top of those conversations, as much as it should be the responsibility of the course instructor, likely they may not even consider how many hours they might be asking you to work. Yes, there's a 160 maximum, but really they hand you a pile of grades, and until you're done, that's about it. So making sure that you're staying on top of how many hours you're actually working, the conversations that you're having, taking meticulous notes of those conversations. As Ashley said, just document as much as possible to ensure that you have some evidence going forward around what those expectations and divisions of labor are. So thank you, Ashley. Next up, we have Addy speaking on behalf of CUPE from a human rights perspective. So Addy, welcome to the stage, and looking forward to your presentation.
Addy, did you want me to go first?
Yeah, go ahead, Dave. Thanks so much, Sophie. I'll let Dave go first, and then I'll go after him.
Okay, Dave will go first. Thank you so much. He will
Thanks,
be bringing
Sophie.
a perspective on sort of the legislation aspect of employment law. Welcome, Dave.
Hi, everyone. My name is Dave Steele. I'm a lawyer at CUPE, and I deal specifically with issues that arise out of organizing and the certification process, and litigate almost exclusively at the Ontario Labour Relations Board, where those matters are determined. So I deal almost exclusively with the Labour Relations Act, which deals with the relationship between employers and unions. I don't necessarily deal with the Employment Standards Act, which is what the presentation before me was sort of dealing with. Excellent presentation, excellent advice there, especially the part about documenting everything and saving all of your emails and all of that stuff. If you're ever going to attempt to enforce your rights or litigate those rights, having all of that information is obviously extremely important. So right now, and I learned a few things about some of the issues going on in this workplace from that presentation too, which is very interesting, and some of the issues that you're having, like in terms of potential overtime, like if you're up to a max of 160 hours, and potential changes to your employment contract during the middle of your contract. So those are all very interesting, and it sounds like you have a good advocate in the GSA, and of course with the union, you'd also have an advocate there as well. But when you're in a unionized environment, you have a collective agreement, which is essentially a contract between the employer and the union, which is you. And the ESA is the Employment Standards Act is a different kettle of fish. The Employment Standards Act is essentially the basement. It's the floor upon which you can't have an employment contract go beneath. I'm going to talk just a bit about the ESA, just briefly, sort of what it covers and critically how to enforce your rights under the ESA. Then I'll talk a bit about how those same rights are enforced under a collective agreement. If you have any questions, especially about how to become unionized or the process of becoming unionized and how that works and the various issues involved in that, definitely just throw those questions in the chat or raise your hand or whatever. I'm definitely the person to ask about those types of questions. The ESA, like I said, it sets out the minimum terms and conditions of employment for workers in Ontario and how those rights are to be enforced. You cannot contract out of the ESA. So if you sign an employment contract that says, you're going to be paid below minimum wage, that's not enforceable. Even if you signed that contract willingly and all that, it's the basement, right? You cannot legally enter into a contract that provides you anything less than the ESA. And you don't have to be a Canadian citizen or permanent resident or even have a work permit to be covered by the ESA. Everyone's covered. There's a few exceptions, farm workers and stuff I don't think we'll get into here, but the terms and conditions of your employment are obviously set out in your employment contract, and usually those are above and beyond what's offered in the ESA, but the ESA is always there to be enforced as well. Someone mentioned something about the employer changing their terms and conditions sort of mid-contract. I haven't seen the individual employment contracts that the TAs, the RAs, and the sessional sign, but my assumption is that there is language in there that allows the employer to alter or insert language into that employment contract unilaterally. Now, the employer can change the terms and conditions of employment without, if they have that language, without the employee's consent. However, a court may refuse to enforce that contractual term, and they may consider it what's called a constructive dismissal. They say the change to your employment contract is so fundamental and so altering your original contract that it's effectively terminating your employment because you didn't agree to that from the outset. Employment contracts like the ones all of you have signed to work there are different than like a commercial contract, because an employment contract are presumed to be the product of an agreement between two parties of unequal power. You know, that differs from a commercial contract where you go to buy a pair of sneakers and you're meeting in the marketplace as equals and just buying your pair of sneakers. An employment contract is presumed to be a contract between two parties who have unequal power, and so therefore a court might use its authority to prevent an employer from relying on unreasonable terms and conditions in an employment contract. Sorry, that's just an aside on that specific issue. The ESA covers basically anything and everything in most employment contexts. I think yours, especially with TAs, RAs, and sessionals, you do have some things that are very unique to this type of work, and CUPE does represent a ton of these types of workers, so we're very knowledgeable about how to negotiate collective agreements that have language specific to those issues, which I'll touch on in a minute. But yeah, the ESA covers minimum wage, overtime, especially pay and terms of pay and timeliness of pay. If there's an issue, I think someone referenced with the timeliness of pay, that's something that you can file a complaint under the ESA about. Of course, consult with the GSA and Christy and the rest of the inside committee about how to best strategize any sort of complaint along those lines. The ESA covers, public holidays. Currently, there's 9 in Ontario. They're usually called stat holidays, and how pay is governed around those. There's certain job protected leaves like sick leave, family responsibility leave, pregnancy leave, parental leave. And I'm going to drop in the chat the link to the Government of Ontario's website where you can officially lodge a complaint under the Employment Standards Act, and it's actually a very good guide for how to do so. Like I said, obviously, you're probably going to want to consult with the GSA and the inside committee in that about this, and obviously take the advice of the previous presentation of documenting everything for sure. The main takeaway from the ESA is that it's the floor beneath which no employment relationship or contract can go below. If you think there's an issue with your employer, reach out to the union and the GSA and that, and look at filing a complaint. Once you file a complaint, there'll be a decision rendered after an investigation. If you're not happy with those results, you can file a review with the Ontario Labour Relations Board within 30 days of receiving that order or decision. Just to move on briefly, I know my time is almost up, but in a unionized environment, you have a collective agreement, and that is a binding contract between two parties, the employer and the union. The union, which is you, would be the workers, collectively agree that the terms and conditions of employment will be set out in a single document. the CBA, the collective bargaining agreement, or collective agreement. People call it various things. And usually they're written in a way that is fairly easy to understand, unlike the Employment Standards Act, which is a nightmare. And even lawyers have difficulties understanding the provisions of the ESA. But a collective agreement is designed to be read by average workers who aren't specializing in this particular field, right? Which is great. And so main provisions of a collective agreement, usually the very first provision is a scope or recognition clause, which sets out the workers that the collective agreement covers. So it'll say something like all employees of the University of Western Ontario or University of Waterloo engaged in XYZ in the city of Waterloo, save and except supervisors and those above the rank of supervisors, something like that. There's usually no discrimination provisions. There's no strike or lockouts during the term of a collective agreement. Post-secondary education collective agreements often have provisions about academic freedom. Usually there's provisions that deal with labor management meetings where the two parties agree to meet on a regular basis to discuss the various issues that arise between them. Usually there's provisions that deal with progressive discipline, meaning individuals